today, again, the theme overall, I think you guys have been seeing a lot of, great presentations around disruption, reinvention, evolution, and our topic today is really around virtual reality and the virtual evolution. It's one of those areas I think that really kind of defines disruption. It's continually evolving. It's a super hot topic right now in entertainment and gaming, pretty much everywhere. So, we're hoping that today we'll be able to kind of give you guys a top-level landscape, a couple different samples here and there, and frankly some takeaways on what that means. But it's really for us, we're hoping to get kind of through this quickly and get to the end because we're more interested in kind of having that open conversation in the Q&A. So we'll get started.
So I always like to talk about virtual reality and dive into a couple of the key tenets. Things like know your audience. You'll find, and I think this is with everything that we do, is when new technology comes along, new ideas, I find a lot of folks come up and go, we should do this. And I find myself going, for who? And why? It's like, we need a video. Really? Loving technology, which is always fun to say to a bunch of design folks and people that are not necessarily technologists. But when we're dealing with new technology like this, if you don't love the technology, don't dive into it yet.
Yeah.
Wait a bit. Because right now, it's technology heavy. There's a lot of bits and pieces. This is not like plugging in the blender and hitting the button and it goes. This is not like turning on a television. This is complicated, it's hard, and there's a lot of weird nuances to it still.
It's a little messy still.
It's a little messy. We're creating new stories, absolutely. But frankly, I find sometimes we're trying to retell the old story with the new stuff. Should we be doing that? Disrupt, evolve, and repeat. I love this one. This one's fun when especially when you're chatting with folks that are relatively new in any different field, and they realize that things have actually happened before. I don't know how many of you lived through the interactive TV era, which has been going on for the last 30 years. But it's amazing how many people are saying, wow, we've never done this before. Yeah, chances are we have. We may have done it differently. We may have used a different tool. But frankly, we've done a lot of the similar kinds of things. We just sometimes do it better. And then the future is yesterday, which is, let's face it, just about the time that we finished with this talk, everything we said, that's going to be old school. Knowing the audience. So I wanted to do a quick survey. How many of you are familiar with virtual reality, have heard about virtual reality? Great. Almost everybody. There's one or two of you that are still wondering what the heck we're talking about. We'll get to that. Augmented reality? What about mixed reality? I've started thinning the herd. How many of you have experienced any one of those three? I bet. All right. Now, how many of you actually own a virtual reality headset?
It does. It's not his area. It's my area. It's cool.
A legitimate question.
Cool. Don't
no,
listen
and
to
it all plays into this. He goes, what about Google Cardboard?
Interesting.
Right. And that sort of typifies what we're talking about. You all are elites. You're cutting edge. You're doing cool stuff. And we've almost all heard about it. We've almost all experienced it. But this is a tool set that is still hard to get our hands on except for things like Google Cardboard.
Yeah.
And knowing who out there, let's face it, this is rarefied air, right? I come from an organization that we have a demographic that is 18 to 49 and breathing.
Yeah.
A lot of flyover states in there too. How many of those people, when we whittle down to have something beyond a Google Cardboard, have experienced it, know about it? And that's what we have to start thinking about. So knowing that audience, very important.
And then, that kind of dovetails into the landscape. I think just from the show of hands in here, we're really looking at, from our perspective, and I think this is a great thing for this audience to look at, is really looking at the maturity of that audience, right? What's that barrier of entry? So what's really the landscape look like? We know it's a fragmented landscape. We know there's high end to low end. You've got, Rift to Cardboard, right? And you've got simply your phone doing 360. You know, you go into quality's not yet defined, it's expensive to produce. It's not an easy sort of task. So I think it really, you know, goes back into that first thing about knowing the audience and really understanding who you're talking to, you know, when you're in a creative position. If you're in an agency, for us, you're on the broadcast side, you still have to, ultimately you can't connect with the broadest base unless you are doing niche, then you may have an epic fail on that, right?
You know, a point on quality. There are people that think the consumer grade camera 360 experience on YouTube is quality VR.
Yeah.
Right? Quality perception is all over the map right now in this particular area. What we think is quality, what we define it as. Like we'll get into is, all right, random, who here thinks that YouTube 360 is VR? Oh man, you are schooled correctly. But you're also kind of kidding yourself, because it is. Like, is it the hardcore definition of true interactive VR? No. But you know, if I could pick up a phone and do this and move around.
Yeah.
So how we define this thing, like, you know, God help us if we go out to a consumer and go, oh, okay, YouTube 360, that's actually 2D 360 video, and that's different than VR, and that's, but that same video can show up on Oculus. Never. Yeah.
Well, and I think to that point, you know, it's simplifying that path, right? The barrier of entry for a consumer to really kind of understand what stories you're telling to get them into that. So, you know, let's kind of we'll keep it running, we'll keep it moving. And so, you know, one of the things you guys have heard us already talk about, right? It's all about reach, right? But the interesting piece with that, it's all about economics as well. And that barrier of entry is really, really interesting from our perspective, because we're asked to do, you know, invent, reinvent, do naturally impossible things, but at what level can we actually capture an audience, right? And so we're going to flash this piece up a little quick, and John's going to kind of talk to what we see is specifically, these are your entry costs, but these costs are all actually really hidden.
Right, so we talk about this. So your cell phone, right? You almost think of it as free this day, but it's the lowest common denominator in this world of virtual reality 360 video, the continuum that goes from Facebook and YouTube all the way up to the Oculus world. There's this early entry cell phone. I can do this with it. Then you have the Google Cardboard. Owners of the Google Cardboard, be proud. There you go.
I'm a lover of them. Trust me.
And in fact, it's usually cheaper than this because somebody's thrown one at you at some trade show, right? Like they're like, please take it. But the reality is, it is worthless. It's nice. I'm just wondering how many people opened the New York Times and went, why did they give me extra cardboard? I'm confused. It's worthless without a cell phone. And we go back to the price of the cell phone. Then you go to Samsung Gear, and everybody's like, "Oh, $99 virtual reality." Yeah. Needs that really expensive cell phone again,
and extra pieces.
And extra pieces. And then we go to the Oculus Rift and HTC Vive. Those are really cool. But then the reality is the type of PC that takes, and it's PC, that takes to drive that sucker and to drive it well, drives your costs like that. And the reality is that we start getting the sub 1% of the humanity that actually owns a PC that is capable of doing that today, right? Like, I mean, it's today. But to put the right PC together to drive that, I mean, it's like, I am wondering, there are probably people out there that have got on the early ordering list for a Vive or an Oculus, and they're going to get it, and they're going to go,
now what?
Where does this go?
And then the last one, I think, is really HoloLens, which isn't really, you know, effectively VR, right?
Yeah, we got Magic Leap, we've got HoloLens, we've got OMG, not OMG. Yeah, I think it's OMG. Yeah. And that's not, oh my God, for those people out there. It's a competitor to HoloLens. You've got all of those systems and units, which are just now, some of you are touching them or experimenting with them and working with them. But these are all the hidden costs. These are the things that the marketplace says, VR is here today. Let's be careful about that. Let's know what area we're stepping into, because at a lot of these price points, not so much.
And they look fantastic.
Yeah,
so,
pretty.
You know, from my perspective, I want one of each. But the reality is when I start thinking about how many I need, I'm actually like you. I'm kind of in the cardboard area. My kids love it. They've got an entry point into VR. They're excited. They can't get enough of it, right?
But from a usability standpoint, right?
Yeah.
Cardboard is a snackable experience. I don't know. I mean, if you've held your cardboard up to your head longer than 10 minutes, God love you. It's a bit challenging as a usability experience, other than that quick snack, that experience. But for what it is, it's fantastic and it's approachable. It is, and I think I can say this in public, a gateway drug, right? I said it.
You said it.
I brought it out. Yeah, you know. Welcome to New York.
So I mean, we're going to try to get through this. We got some great samples, but you know, I think this kind of gives a little bit of level set for the room as well, right? 68% consumers in the U.S. own a smartphone. That was pre-2015 holiday season. So we're anticipating smartphone penetration will hit about 75, 76% by this holiday season as well, which is pretty significant in the U.S. And then you've got 6.1 billion projection on global smartphone users by 2020. There's only about 7.1 billion people on the planet as of today right now. So that's an extraordinary number, right? And then the last one, which is that eeky little thing that's like playing around there that everybody has, which is Facebook. And you're looking at an average with Facebook's monthly average uniques, 1.6 billion. So, you know, again, when we look at opportunity, we look at scale, that's a significant number, right? That gives me a big audience reach. Now, I might not be doing the full-on Oculus, but Facebook has different sort of abilities for us to be able to play with as creatives, as designers, to create experiences to get people into that. So it might be a shared experience. It might be in a different way than having a premium level Rift, and you might still have the Facebook sort of experience that's going to be in your, you know, in your cardboard.
Interestingly enough, and the gentleman in Facebook's next door, but different division, Facebook and YouTube represent an interesting point in time, because never before have I seen in my media career of doing interactivity since the coming of the wheel, have I seen distribution actually exist before the platforms and before the content, right? Usually I'm waiting for good, efficient distribution. How do I get that interactivity to that set-top box? How do I get through that cable system? But today, folks, we have worldwide complete distribution of a 360 experience on 2 different platforms.
Yeah, and 2 different major platforms.
It gets slightly more complicated when we talk about China, but frankly, they've got a lot of great products there as well. So between Facebook and YouTube, you can reach almost everybody on the planet one way or the other. Add a couple of other systems. You can reach with 2D 360 experiences, which you can do some interesting things with.
Right.
So that is the starting point. And neither one of those companies is sitting around twiddling their thumbs. Now, the part of the challenge is neither one of them is necessarily agreeing on any kind of standards, which is going to make this a horse race, and goes back to loving technology. But we'll continue.
So again, I'm a design, a creative guy, but I happen to love numbers because for me it helps not just with the technology and the products, but inform what types of stories, what types of experiences we need to look at. You know, and again, 41%, which seems a little bit less actually than well, no, actually you guys tested pretty high on understanding VR, but that 41% is the average consumer. Decent number, not a great number, right? Unless you're over 51%, 52% from me, it's a hard sort of sell. 25 million, you know, cardboards, apps have been downloaded, and to John's point, you know, people will throw Google Cardboard at you. You probably don't have to buy one, you can probably get one for free. And then really, I think the most interesting point in this is really there's about 10% of the audience is actually looking at defining what is a premium experience, and how we define premium experience is really that next level, that disruptive, that pushing forward, that cinematic, theatrical, gaming, you know, any sort of environment that really has a mixed reality. So it's a very small number that's actually really looking for Rift right now. I mean, it's a great sort of press release. We look at partnerships when we're working with VR in many different ways. I always wonder if it's better for that partner than it is for us, right? They need us because we have the reach right now and the scale with many of our brands. So, technology guy.
All right, fine. Loving technology. To me, at this point, it is really understanding the technology of what it means to produce this stuff. Because we are at that point that there are no standards, there's no uniformity. The quality definition is all over the map. The post-processing of this is pretty much either completely proprietary, custom, or now, you can go to Deluxe and get them to do it. That's really expensive. The camera sets are completely different. So what we're looking at is this point, if you're going to step into this, you've got to understand that landscape. Because too many folks I get to me say they feel like it is an amorphous blob. It's VR. That, as we have talked about, is across the map, right? I see people going out and trying to do great VR experiences with a bunch of GoPros strapped together. I don't know how many of you have taken a GoPro rig, 360 Hero rig out into the field? Anyone? Did you love the experience? You are a sick and twisted person. And I'll say, anytime I've got to independently turn on 6 cameras, hopefully keeping them all on at the same time, and then praying that I'm going to somehow synchronize all of those up. Like, oh, by the way, all the color profiles are slightly different. App can't control the app. Right, like, let's just keep going on, right? It's a great rig. Took one out in the jungles, but it's got its limitations. That seems to be some of the production standard right now. I got news for you, there are much better rigs out there. But they're also much more expensive. If you take a head case rig, 16 cameras, beautiful rig. Love that thing. You should look them up if you haven't seen the head case. Most of the production companies I talk to, it could be weeks in post-production stitching all that together. But you get some beautiful images out of it. If we're going to talk about moving objects, if you're going to talk about going beyond fixed focal length, and I just keep rattling off all of these things because the challenge is, as opposed to shooting with that camera that guy's got back there, that is sort of like 2,000 years ahead of where some of the VR platforms are today that are cobbled together, built in some guy's shop, fixed up, and then shipped out. They're fragile, they're hard to use. Like I said, a lot of them are fixed focal length. Do you like wide angle? Because you're going to get wide angle.
Well, I think
how do you like me now?
I think that goes into the intersection of technology with broad and niche is really the kind of area that we're learning how to play in with as well, which is always
we talked about this, which is over here you have our Facebook, our YouTube platforms, that broad getting out there. I mean, look, as a major broadcaster, we face this. Our folks are like, well, we want to reach our advertisers say we want to reach a lot of people. We it's all about your big network, big shows, go here.
But they want Rift.
But they want Rift, and it's way over here, and this is the really cool thing. So the question is how do we use the technology and the platforms to span across those? And you can do it. I mean, and I was referencing the Facebook, it is published, and I can actually point you to the pointer if you need to. You can go ahead and publish your video to Facebook. It will automatically get pushed to the gear store. And if you're signed in, it will show up in your profile in gear. So you can actually have something that gets published on Facebook and then goes into Oculus, all the way to Oculus.
And I think
this gentleman's looking at me like I'm high.
But that's the interesting part, right?
But and I literally talked to the Facebook team, and they were like, we haven't published that. We need to probably get that better. I'm like, get it out. For God's sakes. This is probably, for me, this was like, oh, so you mean I can satisfy here?
This and this.
To over here? Without having to do a whole lot of machinations? Jesus, why are you sitting on top of this? Right? Because right now I looked at doing a live stream for The Voice. And of course the sponsor was like, we wanted on everything from cardboard to Oculus. And I'm like, all right, but that's a whole lot of machinations. I could do live streams. I could instantly do a live stream to the web. Then a couple hours later, we were going to be able to publish it into YouTube and Facebook, and then that would proliferate it to cardboard, and it would also proliferate it to the Oculus and Gear Store, right? A lot of machinations. Again, I hate to do this. It's a love technology. You got to embrace this part of the world because it's not easy to do it right. But that's what we're talking about, bridging that gap.
So I think that kind of goes right into what I think this audience is looking for as well is, again, the idea of loving technology, which I do, and I love data. I'm a kind of a freak around these types of things. But it's in order to inform like the new ecosystems, right? How can we tell stories? And the stories are shifting and changing. This particular platform, let alone mobile and every other platform that we've now got to deal with, and the multiple screens that we have to deliver and touch people, and connect them with, is evolving rapidly. So I think, one of the interesting things to me for the VR experience, and John will also kind of touch on this with some of our examples, is, the difference is you've got this kind of this 360 sort of thing where I'm moving around, but really when you start telling stories now, I've got to actually think of being in this room and walking through here and being able to turn and pivot. It's complicated, right? It's no longer that I can cut or stitch, a story. We're truly talking about immersing, the audience, the consumer, whatever you want to call them, into a sort of a VR reality or a mixed reality. They want to be in there, right? They're going to be in there. You've got to have different story points. You have to have different scenes. You have to have different intersections. So I really think, I think the one thing to really start thinking about is when you're doing that, start thinking about as creatives, as designers, how you can understand the technology, where it's maturing, feed on it, look at it, see what's out there, and really start to understand how you can utilize that to create kind of the more interesting sort of touch point and story that will become part of this broader campaign, right? Or it can be effectively the crown jewel, and that's the other part where you've got to figure out, from a creative standpoint, at which end of that spectrum you're on. So one of the things that we kind of talk about internally a lot is, in crafting stories, right? Number one, tell the right story. Audience, who am I speaking to? What's their behaviors? Where are they at? How do I get to them? I think that's probably fairly obvious for this audience. The second big point is, of course, use the right technology. John expressed that really deeply. It's complicated, so it's better to partner with product and technology on that if you have that opportunity to do it. If not, you just got to feed yourself and learn about what it really is, right? How it works and really understand it so you can bring a strong POV that can actually be executed when you're designing or creating something.
Just because you can grab a 360 camera and go shoot something
doesn't mean it's any good.
And doesn't mean you probably should.
So, and it's funny because John and I had this big debate, and I say number 3 is actually have the right strategy because should the strategy be first or should the strategy be somewhere along the way? I'm obviously coming from more of the creative and the design perspective. I believe that understanding all those pieces, I know I'm going to get skewered for that one.
I just say
strategy in our world comes first. In my world, design comes first, right? So design informs strategy.
He's got ready, fire, aim.
I think that creatives and design play an incredible role at the beginning stages in understanding these two to bring the right level of execution to the table and inform strategy, not be at the end of that strategy. And I think that's a big shift that really for this audience, I think every creative person experiences this at some point in their life of, it's always how do I get a seat at the table? It's not really that. How am I informed enough to be able to bring something to the table and have an active voice? And that's one of the key takeaways. VR is a huge landscape for, I think, the creatives in general to be able to really execute and bring something to the table with. So of course, then the final is do something great, to John's point. It's not enough just to do something simple. Look, you can do something basic. You can come to the market first. There's always this priority of like, am I first to market? If I'm not first to market, you damn well better bring it, and evolve it. And I think that's kind of the key. So, constantly, again, with the theme of this overall Creative Summit, disruption, push the boundaries, bring something in. The creative people in this room and that are here today are the ones that are going to drive the success of this industry, right? It's finally pivoting back where it's not just about technology or somebody giving you a brief. It's about you bringing that passion, that understanding of how to connect with people emotionally in a much different environment. This is you.
Huh. This disruption and poking at it and asking the bigger question, it's funny is that I ask this of people periodically is so you realize that virtual reality and big virtual reality experiences that are being produced today aren't always 360.
Yeah.
Right? Next VR out there shooting basketball games, they actually have beautiful camera rigs doing 180 degrees. Why? Because frankly, you really don't care who's sitting back there in a basketball game,
Yeah.
right? Like we did a Saturday Night Live performance of the 40th,
Yeah.
and you actually cared who was in the audience because they were more interesting than the person on stage, right? It was Michael
Which was
Douglas.
Jerry Seinfeld, so.
Yeah, well, and he is
interesting.
He was interesting, but you know, Michael Douglas is piping up over there. You kind of want to look over there.
Yeah.
But a basketball game, nah,
Not as much.
they're not that attractive. You're going to be this. But it's interesting that you've got to push and say, you know, just because we're jumping into what we all think is 360, it doesn't have to be. We can tell different stories with this. We can evolve those stories, and then we can bring it back in again. Yeah. So some cases, what we're finding is some of the stories we wanted to tell in the past. I do a lot of documentary work. I would have killed to have 360 rigs in some of the places I've gone to shoot in this world. Yeah. I've been lucky enough to go to Rwanda and spend time with the mountain gorillas. Do you know how much I would love to go back with a 360 camera? Like, I'm just like, you know, it's just things that you can do with these things. The stories I've told in the past that I want to go retell and change the way I've done it. Or what are the brand new stories?
Yeah.
Because I do run into some folks that are just trying to apply this to the same thing we've done before. And sometimes, you know, this camera angle is a pretty good camera angle because for a reason, because it's ugly back there or whatever. But maybe there's a different story I should be telling.
So I think we're going to roll into, so we have a few samples. I think we're rolling into samples. We are.
Yep. All right, so.
I surprised myself. I put the deck together, right?
Hey, look, sunny. It's a brand new day. What I'd like to say, and you know, I'm in mainstream entertainment and things like that, and I'm like, nah, VR for mainstream entertainment. Gaming? Oh, hell yeah.
Yeah.
Right? Like, this is a no duh moment. How many times have you been at a speech where people are like, VR is the dawn of new storytelling. We have to relearn how it is to tell stories. And I'm like, has anybody ever played Grand Theft Auto? Because frankly, those game designers, they kind of get this immersive 360 world where you're moving through it, right?
Yeah.
Like, if you've ever played a Halo, yeah, you can look all around, but you don't want to because you get shot a lot. But no, they get it, right? Yeah. The games world, it's no wonder that Oculus was founded by a bunch of gamers and is really for a bunch of gamers. Let's not kid ourselves that this is one of the first and foremost areas where this just kicks serious butt.
Yeah, and I think, you know, with that, right, I mean the key takeaway on this is like this is a day and date release for Rift, Vive, and PSVR, right? I mean, this is a big deal. I like Vive because I'm different.
All right, fine.
Because I disrupt things.
All right, fine. So the Valkyrie CCP out of Iceland does Eve, the massively multiplayer environment.
How many people have played that?
Okay.
3.
Spot the
it's awesome, by the way. You guys are really
massively multiplayer universe, space, combat, build your own ships. You know, basically it's World of Warcraft in space. That's maybe an oversimplification. Yeah. But what they're doing with Valkyrie, it's the no-duh moment, right? It's put you in the cockpit of a spaceship and turn you loose in space battles. What's interesting is I forget, the Oculus rating for this is intense, I think is the one. Which means basically most of you who play this will get sick and bark your brains out.
If you have motion sickness by any means, probably don't play this.
But for the gamers, this is nirvana, right? The number of games where you're going to be able to put yourself even more into that cockpit.
Yeah.
Now, what matters here? What matters is the controls around you, right? Because it's not just the fact that I'm watching something, but I've got to control the spaceship. So the design and the interface between what my hands are doing and what's going on is key. Mm-hmm. The physical controls are key. But this is representing one of those areas where this is just going to absolutely go crazy.
Yeah. And I think, you know, the integration with Facebook and Facebook Live is another, you're right, key element for this to bring in a broad community. Again, when we look back at some of those earlier numbers, you're really, really amplifying this in a crazy way. So, you know, look, VR for the most part is difficult to show any videos on, so we apologize in advance. We have one kind of short trailer for this, and you know, again,
just everybody do this.
Well, I think it's awesome because from a design perspective, from a creative perspective, I mean, the amount of detail in this is just incredible. So I think it should roll up right now.
Here it comes again. Death. Cold. Inevitable. My canopy explodes, and my body freezes. But I remember everything. Every victory. Every escape. Every mistake. And I learn. I grow. I improve. You haven't killed me.
So again, you know, with this, it's like this is it, right? This is the full immersive. This is where, you know, I think the maturity in many other areas within VR are really trying to get. I mean, this is full head spin. This is making, you know, you're deep in this thing. And I think, you know, again, the level of detail, the complexities on the technology and the execution for this are just at the highest level.
Most of our examples, and I'll just give the caveat that most of our examples are in and around the entertainment industry, but big surprise, we're entertainment people. Yeah. And just a quick segment before we go into the Martian is that, again, when I point to gaming in the entertainment cross-section, I think that's where VR is really kicking butt. When I point out completely outside of the entertainment industry, I also think that's where this medium really starts to sing. And frankly, when you look at a lot of the numbers, it really is talking about AR and MR as the places where this is really going to be taking off, because it gets into all different aspects of industry that frankly have nothing to do with entertainment, but have a reason to be able to either overlay your environment or to be able to completely immerse yourself in a particular environment. But when I look at entertainment, something like The Martian, where this is probably right now, one of those seminal pieces that is longer form, entertainment based, major studio backed, based off of an IP, The Martian, where what they've done with this is give you they like to call it a 20 to 30 minute experience. So because there is not gaming in there, but they call it gamification, but there's things you can do. You can move through the story in a fairly linear fashion, or you can stop and, Shawn was pointing out that, you know, put the solar panels on, or play with the potatoes. If you've seen The Martian, you know the whole potato thing. But this piece really represents, certainly for Fox, that step where they are making that major step with the IP and saying, no, it's not just a marketing piece. This is a way to experience both the environment and the story in a much more immersive way. Like it's about 30 minutes long. It really takes you into the world.
And it brings, you know, I think what I find interesting from it, again, on a creative standpoint, it's like one of the first things that really brings you in to the emotion, right? You are in the shoes, so to speak, of that main character. And, you know, when the dust storms are coming up and the audio is on, it's like, you know, your heart starts to race. Nothing's going to happen to you, but all of a sudden you're kind of jettisoned into that spot, which I think is really where it's a nice sort of intersection of something that we've seen that we wish we would have done, you know. But it's one of those things that really stands out, and it's a good sort of thing. It got a lot of press, obviously, around it, big names behind it.
And you got Stromberg, who, you know, directed it. Ridley Scott was executive producer. It's, interestingly enough, produced by a virtual reality company that had its start in previs. So if you're not familiar with the concept of previs, in the movie industry, there's a lot of, the director goes, okay, I'm trying to figure out how to set up the shots. So they pre-visualize a lot of shots, or maybe the entire movie, usually in CGI graphics, not full fidelity. And previs artists are able to model worlds. So VRC, which is the virtual reality company that did this, came out of a previs company. And so they already understood, one, the language of film, storytelling, and complete CGI environments, and creating that world building. So for them, this was a natural extension of building this. But like I said, this is an example that isn't just a snackable 5-minute thing. Now there is one out on the web, because they did a short
small version
first, and then this full version. And it is frankly really hard to get a hold of, because again, it's a full Oculus Vive sort of experience, which is frustrating because I'm like telling you about something that's really cool and you should be inside it, but I can't show you.
Right.
Now talk a little bit about one of the companies that I think is seminal for starting this conversation about VR and not just a quick marketing hit. It's the shiny new quarter. And let's face it, VR to a lot of agencies I've run into is the shiny new quarter. But what are we doing with that? And Verse, as it was Chris Milk and Aaron Koblin came together, and it's a new production company, right? They're an overall company that brings premium quality directors, but what they focused on was storytelling and quality immersive experiences. They are going for things that they've done the New York Times piece, the Sidra piece, they did, I'm trying to remember the name.
SNL 40.
Well, they did the SNL 40, but that aside, the Ebola piece, but again, production companies underneath them producing this. But if I hold up some of the folks that are out there as purveyors of storytelling in this environment and trying to move that forward, I would say the Verse team is one of those teams that
I think
focused on that.
From again, from my perspective, when you look at creativity, I mean, these guys are doing the top end stuff, right? They're doing short form type pieces and content. They're looking at doing more series based, and it's really, really amazing, quality. I mean, some of the pictures on this screen are from the New York Times piece that they did around, I believe, the Oscars with Fassbender and a bunch of other folks that were nominated, and it was just like, you just floated out of New York up into the clouds. It really had no purpose, but it was fantastic. It was just beautiful, and you're just kind of looking around on your cardboard and kind of scoping things out, and I think, it's just the construction of that type of thing that is snackable is, again, a low barrier of entry, but a high premium sort of value when you're looking at, whether it's clients or whether it's, from the agency side, for us, from even a broadcast level, we're looking at marketing or we're looking at advertising levels. Like, these are easy sort of areas for us to enter in and have the greatest scale, of course, can just be on 360 with phones as well. So we should probably roll through this pretty quick. I think we've already kind of spoken with all this. I didn't forget to hit the button. I mean, this is basically what we just said, right? It's emotional, immersive, it's premium documentary style. I mean, there's a lot of great pieces about this. If you haven't checked out the Verse app yet, I think one of the interesting things is it's a significant amount, by the way, with those people who own Google Cardboard and have in the Google app itself, like Verse is like #2 on the downloads for that. So it's probably got the best content out there. So if you're looking at a way to check it out, pick up a Cardboard, download the Verse app, and just take a look. They're constantly sort of changing things. So the future is yesterday. It's evolving. I mean, I think the big takeaway for today is the fact that whatever we thought was happening before is happening again. Whatever we make today will change tomorrow. And really, I think, at this point, a lot of those pieces that we've touched on with understanding technology, understanding your audience, just understand that it's like you can get into this market, you can have a point of view, you can jump in at any time. It's going to change 60,000 times. It's being flooded with massive amounts of money. There's a lot of eyeballs on it, but nobody has really shaped out what this thing means yet.
So a couple of examples, which is, if you think about it today, as some of the most premium VR experiences are heavy downloads. Like, I don't know how much memory you have left on your phone, but I break my phone consistently because most of the premium VR experiences are still downloaded. They're huge 600 megabyte files. Right? So you think about in a day that we're streaming almost everything, we've taken a step back and we're downloading everything. You can look at things like the Samsung store, which the rumor has it is going to go away and be revamped. Because what is it? It is a place where you see a bunch of posters and then you have to download a bunch of stuff built on graphics that, quite frankly, were Second Life-ish at best, if you've been in Second Life. So everything we see now, the stuff we're talking on today, is constantly, rapidly changing. And then that is why you have to kind of understand the framework of what's going on right now, because we're at such a 0.5, 0.75 of this thing that it's nuts. Like I said, still remember, there is no standard whatsoever for this. So we could see divergent platforms where they say, you know what, you're going to have to render this content 4 different times for 4 different platforms. still kind of mind-boggling. And that's why I say it's cool, but yet it's got those challenges.